Who let this roach in? Somebody call the front desk right now. The city trash apparently took the wrong elevator this morning. Since when can street rats from Anacostia read multi-million-dollar structural blueprints? Who approved this diversity hire without running a background check?
Julian Sterling said that without even lifting his eyes from his custom leather-bound planner. He was sitting in the main lobby of Vanguard Landmark, located at 555 Constitution Avenue in the absolute heart of Washington, D.C. It was exactly 8:14 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. There were 4 senior architects and corporate associates standing within earshot, and every single one of them heard every single syllable that left Julian's mouth. They froze. The ambient noise of the grand entrance, the clicking of high heels on white marble, the rustle of morning newspapers, the low hum of the security scanners, vanished into a suffocating, heavy silence. Elijah Vance held his ground. He didn't flinch, he didn't take a step back, and his hands didn't shake. He stood perfectly straight, wearing a plain navy blazer and a $15 white shirt. "I am Elijah Vance," he said, his voice dropping into a low, calm, completely level register that forced people to lean in to hear. "I am your new urban planning intern from Howard University. I am scheduled to report to your division today." 30. Julian's head snapped up. His eyes, cold, sharp, and dripping with generational arrogance, scanned Elijah from his scuffed shoes to his neatly combed hair. "Planning?" Julian let out a short, mocking laugh that echoed off the high limestone columns of the atrium. "You? Since when can street rats from Anacostia read multi-million-dollar structural blueprints? Who approved this diversity hire without running a background check?" Elijah didn't answer him. His jaw tightened just enough for the muscle near his ear to twitch, but his eyes remained locked onto Julian's. That was the only sign of life he gave. Julian stood up, towering over the young intern. "You really think you belong in a place like this, kid? Look around you. This isn't a community center. We designed the skyline of the Capitol." Julian slowly reached across the polished reception desk and picked up his heavy ceramic coffee cup. It was full, dark, and still sending thin wisps of hot espresso steam into the air. He didn't throw it across the room. That would be too dramatic, too unrefined for a man who sat on the executive leadership board. Instead, Julian did something infinitely worse. He stepped into Elijah's personal space, close enough for Elijah to smell the expensive cologne radiating from his tailored charcoal suit. Slowly, deliberately, Julian placed the hot, burning ceramic cup directly into Elijah's right hand. He didn't just hand it over. He manually wrapped Elijah's fingers around the burning porcelain, one by one, pressing down until Elijah's knuckles were forced against the hot surface. "Your primary job description today, Vance, is to hold my coffee, carry my leather presentation bags, and keep your mouth completely shut unless I explicitly tell you to breathe. Do you think your limited vocabulary can manage that simple task, or do I need to break it down into smaller, simpler words for you?" 14 professionals stood completely motionless. Nobody looked up. Nobody cleared their throat. It was a masterclass in institutional cruelty, and the crowd chose safety over basic human decency. But here is the one critical detail that absolutely nobody in that marble lobby knew. The 22-year-old kid standing there, dripping with quiet humiliation, was carrying a secret. And that secret was a slow-burning fuse that was about to blow Julian Sterling's entire corporate empire into absolute pieces. 0130. After Julian turned his back and walked toward the executive elevators, Elijah didn't drop the cup. He didn't let out a sigh of defeat, and he didn't run to the men's restroom to wash the heat from his fingers. He stood dead in the center of that grand lobby for a full 10 seconds, letting the reality of the environment settle deep into his mind. He looked down at the plain white shirt his mother had carefully ironed for him, under the flickering light of their kitchen table at 4:30 a.m. Then, with a slow, measured step, he walked directly over to the main security desk. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. She looked at her monitor, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of secondary shame and corporate fear. Without a word, she slid a thin, clear plastic folder across the desk. It contained no high-end corporate lanyard, no electronic badge, just a temporary paper pass. "Your assigned workspace is down that hall," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the desk. "Take the east corridor all the way to the end. It's the very last door on your left-hand side. Don't wander into the main design bays." Elijah took the clear folder, gave her a polite nod, and walked down the long, wide hallway. As he moved, he passed the main glass-walled intern suite. He slowed his pace just enough to observe the space inside. It was a massive, sunlit room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the National Mall. There were 5 desks arranged in a collaborative circle. On each desk sat a brand-new, top-spec Apple MacBook Pro, still sealed in its factory plastic wrapping. Beside each computer was a premium leather welcome kit, a company-branded steel water bottle, a sleek notebook, and a personalized, hand-signed welcome letter from the senior leadership partners. In the center of the large room was a massive mahogany table covered with a catering platter of fresh fruit and high-end pastries. 5 chairs, 5 interns. Every single one of them was white, dressed in luxury designer labels, chatting amiably about their summer homes in Martha's Vineyard. One of them, a young woman named Chloe Bennett, happened to look up. Her eyes made direct contact with Elijah through the clear glass panel. 0230. Chloe saw the thin, cheap folder in his hand. She saw his plain Walmart tie. She saw the raw determination in his eyes. For a split second, her expression shifted, the subtle, telltale micro-expression of a person who realizes something is fundamentally unjust, but has already made the internal calculation that her own comfort is worth more than someone else's dignity. She opened her mouth slightly, as if an impulse to speak had crossed her mind. Then she smoothly looked back down at her glowing screen, completely erasing Elijah from her reality. Elijah didn't wait for her pity. He kept walking down the corridor as the luxury carpet turned into hard, unpainted linoleum flooring, and the bright designer lights transitioned into cheap commercial fixtures. The last door on the left didn't have a glass panel. It didn't have a nameplate. It didn't even have a proper doorknob. It was a heavy industrial fire door that led directly into a ventilation storage room. No window, no air circulation, just the cold, oppressive smell of stale industrial bleach and damp mops. No 3. A cheap wooden folding table had been roughly shoved against a raw concrete wall. In the corner sat an old plastic mop bucket, filled with dirty gray water from the night shift. 3 heavy cardboard boxes, filled with archived, dust-covered blue line architectural prints from 2014, were stacked haphazardly on the concrete floor. Above the table, a single old fluorescent light tube buzzed loudly, flickering every 4 seconds with a rhythmic, annoying click, the exact kind of broken light fixture that facilities never bothers to repair, because no one of any real importance is ever forced to sit beneath it. No corporate computer, no leather welcome kit, no hand-signed letter, no fruit. Elijah stood in the narrow doorway, his frame silhouetted against the dark interior of the closet, and he stared at the space for a long, unblinking moment. If you were standing there watching his face, you would have seen absolutely nothing. No tears of frustration, no anger, no self-pity. Just the quiet, terrifyingly focused calculation of a young man who had already decided exactly how this story was going to end. 0330. Let's rewind. Exactly 6 hours before Julian Sterling placed that burning coffee cup into Elijah's hand, the world was completely quiet on the other side of the Anacostia River. At 5 a.m., inside a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment where the radiator rattled like an old engine, Elijah Vance was already awake. The morning light hadn't even touched the horizon. He stood in front of a cracked bathroom mirror, meticulously adjusting the knot of his plain, $15 white shirt. His hands were perfectly steady. In the kitchen, his mother, Mary Vance, was already sitting at the small wooden table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of cheap instant coffee. Her hands were rough, lined with the deep calluses of a woman who had worked 12-hour night shifts as a senior nurse's assistant at Temple University Hospital for over 28 years. She watched her son through the doorway with an expression of quiet, fierce intensity. She had spent her entire life watching brilliant black men get pushed to the margins of Washington's elite circles, and she knew exactly what lay beyond the river. "Elijah," she said, her voice dropping into a low, gravelly rasp that only came from decades of early mornings. "You look at me." Elijah turned around, smoothing down the front of his plain navy blazer. Mary leaned forward, her knuckles pressing against the faded oilcloth table. "You carry your grandfather's name, and you carry his blood. He didn't survive the segregated construction yards of Virginia for you to walk into a corporate office with your head down. When you walk through those massive glass doors at Vanguard Landmark today, you do not look down at your shoes. You do not let those Ivy League corporate boys make you feel like an outsider. You earned your degree from Howard. You finished top of your class because your mind is faster than theirs. You hold your dignity, Elijah. It belongs to you, and nobody can take it from you unless you hand it over." Elijah walked into the kitchen, a gentle, reassured smile breaking across his sharp features. He leaned down, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the table, and kissed her forehead. "I know, Mom. I'm not going there to make friends. I'm going there to do the work. I'm ready." 0430. What Mary Vance didn't know was the sheer scale of the gamble her son was taking. Elijah had explicitly made one absolute, non-negotiable demand to his father before the summer program began. No corporate introductory phone calls, no hidden emails to the Human Resources Department, and no internal memos to the Executive Hiring Board. He didn't want a padded seat, and he didn't want a shield. Elijah wanted to walk into the belly of the beast, completely exposed. He needed to know, with absolute certainty, if his raw talent, his hours of tireless study, and his skin color could survive the reality of the American corporate structure without his father's massive shadow protecting him. He wanted to see the corporate system for exactly what it was when the cameras were turned off. He wanted to know if he was truly enough on his own. 5. Now, back in the present, inside the narrow, suffocating storage room at 10:15 a.m., Elijah opened his worn leather briefcase. He pulled out his own laptop, a heavily scratched, refurbished Lenovo ThinkPad L480 that he had purchased from an older classmate for exactly $185. The battery life was deteriorating, and the plastic casing was chipped at the corner, but the processor was fast enough for what he needed to do. He opened the screen. Because the Human Resources Department hadn't issued him an employee network badge or a corporate login password, he had to connect to the slow, unsecured corporate guest Wi-Fi. He sat on a cheap plastic chair, his knees nearly hitting the underside of the wooden folding table, and he went to work. He didn't wait for an assignment from Julian Sterling. He knew an assignment would never come. Instead, Elijah pulled up Vanguard Landmark's public municipal filings from the city's open-source CC database. 0530. He was looking at the D.C. Metro Silver Line Extension Project, a highly controversial $42 million infrastructure contract that Vanguard Landmark had been managing for the past 14 months. Elijah opened a massive Excel spreadsheet. For the next 3 hours, completely uninterrupted by the rest of the office, his fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't just skimming the public summaries. He was performing a forensic structural audit. He cross-referenced the city's environmental zoning laws with Vanguard's published material procurement sheets, tracing every single dollar spent on structural concrete and steel reinforcement. By 12 p.m., while the buzzing fluorescent light tube overhead flickered its relentless rhythm, Elijah had produced a 12-page, flawlessly formatted analytical brief. He had identified a massive, critical structural oversight in the line's foundational drainage design, a flaw that, if left uncorrected, would cause severe structural degradation within 5 years, costing the city millions in litigation and repairs. He included 3 highly sophisticated, actionable engineering recommendations that would save the firm exactly $4,215,000 in immediate procurement costs. Sigo 6. At exactly 12:15 p.m., the other 5 interns walked past his half-open storage door. Their loud, animated laughter filled the narrow corridor. Chloe Bennett was leading the group, her brand-new, company-issued silver MacBook Pro held tightly under her arm. They were talking about walking down to the upscale French bistro on Pennsylvania Avenue for an expensive lunch. None of them paused. None of them looked into the dark room to see the intern, who had been publicly humiliated 4 hours earlier. They moved past him like he was a permanent fixture of the maintenance department, a shadow against the concrete wall. Elijah reached into his briefcase, pulled out a simple ham and cheese sandwich, wrapped in plastic, and ate it completely alone, washing it down with water from his metal bottle. He was a ghost in the machine of his father's company. 0630. At precisely 12:30 p.m., his phone buzzed against the wooden table. Elijah picked it up. The serious, calculated expression on his face instantly softened. A genuine, quiet smile reached his eyes. The text message on the screen was short, landed in D.C. secure, heading straight to the residence. "How is the first day looking, son?" Elijah tapped back with one hand, his text brief and steady. "Landed fine, Dad. First day is moving exactly the way I expected it to. Don't worry about me, love you." He hit send, flipped the phone face down on the table, and went right back to checking his formulas. That text went to a private cell phone contact, saved simply as Dad. No corporate title, no executive designation, no indication that the man on the other end owned the very air the people on the 8th floor were breathing. Julian Sterling, Garrett Vance, and Chloe Bennett had absolutely no idea that the quiet kid eating a brown bag sandwich next to a mop bucket had just sent a direct report to the ultimate authority of the empire. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, a quiet, malicious rumor had successfully traveled across the entire 8th floor of Vanguard Landmark. The Black Intern, the one Julian Sterling had publicly designated as a street rat in the lobby that morning, was still in the building. He hadn't packed up his briefcase. He hadn't left the floor in tears. He was still sitting at that cheap wooden folding table in the dark ventilation closet, his fingers moving methodically across a worn keyboard. For a man like Julian, this wasn't an inspiring display of professional resilience. It was an active, insubordinate threat to his ego. Julian did not tolerate being ignored, and he absolutely despised being proven wrong. He received the latest update from Garrett Vance, his junior associate and personal shadow, the exact kind of corporate sycophant who laughed at Julian's jokes before they even landed and reported every water cooler whisper like it was a matter of national security. Garrett leaned his shoulder against Julian's massive mahogany office door, his arms crossed with a smug grin. "The kid is still in the cleaning closet, Julian. He's using his own old laptop. I walked past the door to get some printer paper, and I saw his screen. He's actually pulling our public SCC municipal data and building some sort of infrastructure audit sheet." 0730. Julian didn't look up from his dual monitors, but his hand gripped his silver designer pen a little tighter. "An audit sheet," he sneered, his voice dropping into an angry, defensive register. "A kid from Howard thinks he's going to audit my division's numbers on his first day. He's trying to carve out a grievance file." Julian's jaw shifted, a dark, calculating expression crossing his face, the precise look of an institutional bully who expected an annoyance to quietly pack up and disappear, only to realize the annoyance was getting comfortable instead. He picked up his heavy desk phone and dialed the front reception desk. "Sarah, this is Sterling. Send someone to set up conference room B for the Q3 project briefing at 2:30 p.m. And listen to me very carefully. Take that new intern, Vance, completely off the corporate attendance list." Sarah hesitated on the other end of the line, her voice trembling slightly. "But Mr. Sterling, the official corporate intern handbook explicitly states that all summer program interns are required to attend." Julian cut her off instantly, his voice cracking like a whip. "Did I ask you to read me the handbook, Sarah? No, I gave you a directive. Handle it." He slammed the phone back onto its cradle. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Elijah watched through the narrow, cracked opening of the storage room door as the other 5 interns proudly filed into conference room B. Their notebooks were open, their brand new, company-issued silver MacBooks were glowing in unison, and Julian was already standing at the glass whiteboard, drawing complex zoning diagrams, cracking inside jokes, and flashing colorful slides. Garrett Vance sat in the front row, nodding along like a mechanical wind-up toy. Everyone was laughing. Everyone was included. Elijah stood up, calmly straightened the collar of his navy blazer, and walked out into the main corridor toward the glass-walled conference room. Chloe Bennett was just about to step inside. She saw Elijah approaching from the dark hallway and slowed her pace. Her face did that predictable thing, the subtle, telltale micro-expression of a person who recognizes an act of cruelty but has already made the internal calculation that staying silent is safer for her career.
"Is this the weekly municipal briefing?"
Elijah asked her, his tone perfectly level, polite, and completely stripped of emotion. Chloe glanced nervously into the room at Julian, then at the 5 chairs that were already filled, and finally at the empty floor space where a 6th chair had never been placed. She looked back at Elijah, at his plain $15 shirt, and walked past him into the room without a single word. She didn't answer. She didn't apologize. She just kept moving.
08:30.
Elijah stood outside that glass door for exactly 4 seconds. Inside, Julian Sterling glanced up from the whiteboard, caught Elijah's reflection in the glass, and then immediately turned back to his presentation as if he had seen a passing shadow against the wall, not a human being. Elijah didn't knock. He didn't make a scene. He turned around, walked back to his dark storage room, and sat down. He pulled up the digital version of the Vanguard Landmark Employee Handbook on his Lenovo screen, scrolling methodically until he found page 14, section 3. 2. All summer program interns shall attend weekly municipal project briefings, regardless of division or assigned supervisor. He took a clean screenshot, saving it directly into a private folder on his hard drive labeled Records. That folder contained 3 items now: the handbook violation screenshot, a high-resolution photo of his storage room workspace with the mop bucket, and a time-stamped photo of his workspace setup from 8:15 a.m. Nobody in the building knew that folder existed, but Elijah knew how to build a structural case. By 5 p.m., he completed his preliminary audit. It was a flawless 12-page document containing an infrastructure retention analysis and 3 specific cost reduction recommendations for the DC project. He formatted it cleanly, drafted a highly professional email with the subject line, "Preliminary Q3 Public Data Review." Elijah Vance, architecture intern, attached the PDF and sent it directly to Julian Sterling.
9.
At exactly 5:09 p.m., Julian opened the email. He skimmed the first page, then the second, and his chest tightened.
His face flushed.
Not because the work was substandard, but because the work was exceptional. It was uncomfortably, terrifyingly good. It was the kind of brilliant engineering analysis that threatened Julian's deep-seated sense of racial and institutional superiority. It contradicted every single ugly assumption Gain had made about the kid from Howard. He closed the PDF, clicked Reply All, and intentionally copied the entire architecture department. 46 senior architects, project managers, and executive partners. Team, a friendly reminder that summer interns are here to learn basic procedures, not to clog our corporate system with unsolicited, unverified, and highly amateur reports. If I require a public data dump, I will explicitly assign it to qualified personnel. Let's keep our corporate inboxes clean, structured, and professional.
JS. 46 senior professionals read that email.
46 people understood exactly who it was designed to humiliate. Not a single person hit reply. Elijah's laptop dinged in the quiet closet. He opened the notification, read the text, and then read it again. His face didn't move, his hands didn't shake. But if you were standing close enough, you would have seen his left thumb press hard into the raw edge of the wooden folding table, pressing until his nail turned completely white, pressing until the pain forced his mind to lock.
0930.
Had closed the laptop slowly, the mechanical click sounding like a gunshot in the cramped space. He sat there in the dark with nothing but the relentless hum of the copy machines on the other side of the wall, and the distant sound of people packing up their luxury leather bags to go home for the evening. For the first time all day, a voice inside his head, quiet, exhausted, and completely honest, asked the forbidden question.
Just call Dad. One phone call. 30 seconds. And all of this.
The closet, the mop bucket, the email, the silent isolation, goes away by dinner. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and stared at the contact name glowing on the screen. Dad.
He held it for 5 seconds.
His thumb hovered less than a millimeter above the green call button. Then, he let out a long, slow exhale through his nose, locked the screen, and placed the phone face down on the table. Not yet, he whispered to the empty concrete walls. He stood up, slung his briefcase over his shoulder, and walked out into the empty corridor. 10-day 2, 8:30 a.m. Elijah Vance walked out of the 8th floor elevator wearing a clean, crisp, hand-washed white shirt. Same navy blazer, same briefcase, same unreadable face. But the entire social atmosphere on the floor had completely solidified against him. Julian Sterling was in absolute performance mode. 3 primary executive partners from a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 real estate development firm were on the floor for a massive project walkthrough. This was Julian's primary stage. He was delivering big handshakes, booming laughter, and high-energy corporate metrics, walking the wealthy clients through the glass corridors like he owned the building himself. Elijah was standing at the small coffee station near the elevators, quietly refilling his metal water bottle, keeping himself completely invisible, staying out of the way just as 24 hours in this building had taught him to do. Then Julian rounded the corner with the wealthy clients, 5 senior associates trailing behind him, and Garrett Vance glued directly to his shoulder.
11 people total.
Julian saw Elijah standing there, and his eyes lit up with a cold, predatory opportunity. 10:30.
Hey, Vance.
Julian's performative client voice boomed down the entire length of the corridor, forcing every nearby employee to stop and look. Perfect timing, kid. Run downstairs to the main lobby, grab my personal dry cleaning from the front desk, and then swing by the artisanal cafe on 4th Street.
Pick up the luxury lunch order under the name Sterling.
You know where 4th Street is, right? Or is a standard city map too complicated for your educational background? The 3 wealthy clients stiffened, an awkward, sudden tension filling the air. The senior associates immediately looked down at the floor. Garrett Vance smirked. Elijah set his metal water bottle down on the marble counter, his movements incredibly slow, his eyes locking directly onto Julian's with a terrifyingly calm precision. Mr. Sterling, I am an approved intern in the Urban Planning and Architecture Division, Elijah said, his voice completely level, carrying clearly across the corridor. I am more than happy to assist with any blueprint analysis, structural metrics, or project data for these clients. But my administrative onboarding does not include personal errands.
11 project data?
Julian cut him off instantly, turning to the wealthier clients with a mocking, showman's grin. You hear this, kid? He's been in our building for 48 hours, and he's already trying to rewrite his job description.
Unbelievable.
Polite, nervous laughter left one client's mouth. The other two remained completely silent, their expressions unreadable. Julian took 2 aggressive steps forward, stepping directly into Elijah's personal space, the scent of his expensive cologne filling the air. His voice dropped into a low, tan nun whisper that still carried perfectly across the quiet circle. Let me make this real simple for your urban brain, Vance. I decide exactly what you do here. I decide exactly what you are in this firm. And right now, Julian reached across the counter and picked up a fresh ceramic coffee cup. Hot, full, dark espresso steaming into the air. He didn't pour it on Elijah's shirt this time.
That would leave too much visible evidence in front of primary accounts.
Instead, he Bao forced the burning ceramic cup into Elijah's right hand, manually wrapping Elijah's fingers around the hot porcelain one by one, pressing down hard until Gant could feel the heat transferring. Your job today is to hold my coffee, carry my bags, and keep your mouth completely shut. Think you can manage that, or do I need to break it down into smaller, simpler words for you? Garrett Vance let out a short, sharp, ugly bark of laughter. The hallway went dead silent. 11:30 Clara Higgins stood exactly 10 feet away, her knuckles gripping a manila project folder so hard that the paper began to tear.
She had seen this identical performance before.
Different year, different intern, same corporate predator, and every single time she had done the exact same thing. Absolutely nothing.
But as she looked at Elijah Vance,
at his calm, unblinking eyes, at the burning ceramic cup held steady in his hand without a single tremor, something rusted deep inside, her conscience finally snapped. Elijah didn't slam the cup down. He didn't spill a single drop of the hot liquid. He slowly, methodically placed the ceramic mug back onto the marble counter, his eyes fixed on Julian's face with a quiet, terrifying dignity. He turned around without a word, walked down the long corridor, and closed the fire door of the ventilation storage room behind him. Julian turned to the Fortune 500 clients, shrugging with a fake theatrical sigh.
kids these days.
Zero work ethic, maximum entitlement.
Let's head to the executive boardroom, gentlemen. The clients didn't laugh. They followed him in heavy, uncomfortable silence.
12. At exactly 3:15 p.m., Elijah was sitting in his designated corner next to the humming service elevator, his Lenovo laptop screen glowing in the shadows. He had spent the last 2 hours compiling his records into a single encrypted PDF file. He wasn't crying. He wasn't packing his things. He was waiting. On the completely opposite side of the 8th floor, the massive corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the United States Capitol, was being unlocked for the first time in 5 weeks. The CEO's executive assistant had been placing fresh white roses on the credenza since morning, and right next to the designer desk lamp sat a silver-framed photograph. Arthur Vance, his silver temples reflecting the light, his arm wrapped around a younger Elijah in a Howard University architecture t-shirt. The nameplate on the mahogany door read, Arthur Vance, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. A sleek black Cadillac town car pulled up to the front entrance of 555 Constitution Avenue. Arthur Vance stepped out onto the sidewalk, his charcoal 3-piece suit pristine, his posture carrying the unyielding weight of an empire built from absolute nothing. He didn't send an email.
He didn't alert the floor. He stepped into the private elevator and pressed 8.
12:30, word of the CEO's unannounced arrival hit the 8th floor like a lightning strike. Associates scrambled to close personal tabs. Senior architects straightened their jackets, and the entire floor stood a little taller. Julian Sterling was the very first leader to reach the elevator bank, his face instantly locking into a wide, performative corporate smile. Arthur, welcome back, sir. Julian boomed, extending his hand for a dominant handshake. We had no idea you were landing today. The Q3 pipeline is exceptionally strong, and this summer's intern class is the finest group of minds we've seen in a decade. Arthur Vance shook his hand, his grip warm but measured, his eyes sharp as razors.
Good to hear, Julian.
Arthur said, his voice deep and gravelly. I want to walk the floor and meet the new faces immediately. Julian proudly led the CEO toward the glass-walled intern suite. Inside, 5 interns stood up instantly, their faces pale with awe. Arthur shook each of their hands, asking about their universities and their active design metrics. Julian stood behind him, narrating like a proud father. This is Chloe, top of her class at Yale.
And Garrett here has been an absolute rock star since day one.
13 Arthur Vance nodded, smiled politely, and then his eyes scanned the mahogany table. He paused.
The warmth in his expression vanished in a single fraction of a second.
Julian, Arthur said, his voice dropping into a level, quiet register that made the entire glass suite grow cold. I reviewed the approved intake list before I boarded my flight from Singapore. There were 6 names on that list. There are only 5 people in this room. Where is the 6th intern? Julian swallowed hard, his performative smile freezing on his face. Oh, the last one? He's around here somewhere, sir. Still getting oriented. New kid, taking a bit of extra time to adjust to the high-pressure pace of a top-tier firm like Vanguard. Arthur's eyes narrowed, a terrifyingly focused intensity locking onto Julian's face.
Where is he, Julian?
Julian's collar suddenly felt suffocatingly tight. Well, we had a minor spacing issue in the main bay this week, so we set up a temporary, quiet workspace for him in the back corridor so he could focus on basic data tracking. Arthur didn't wait for him to finish. He turned on his heel and walked straight toward the east corridor. 1330. Julian followed 3 steps behind, his breathing getting shallower, his voice rising in an anxious pitch. Arthur, seriously, the partners from the development firm are waiting in the West Lounge. This minor administrative detail can easily be handled by HR tomorrow morning. Arthur Vance rounded the final corner and stopped dead in his tracks. Hiding behind a towering wall of rusted metal filing cabinets, right next to the loud, vibrating service elevator, sat Elijah Vance. He was sitting under a buzzing, flickering, fluorescent light tube at a cheap wooden folding table, his crumpled brown paper bag sitting to his scratched Lenovo laptop. No welcome kit, no company MacBook, no human being within 30 feet of his desk. Elijah looked up from his screen. Arthur looked at his son. The entire back hallway went completely, deathly silent. Garrett Vance
Froze mid-stride.
Claire Higgins stood at the edge of the corridor, her breath catching in her throat. Arthur Vance crossed the narrow corridor, his heavy steps slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving Elijah's face.
He didn't look at the storage room.
He didn't look at the rusted filing cabinets. He walked right up to the cheap wooden table, opened his arms wide, and said, loud enough for every single ear in that corridor to hear,
Elijah, son. Stand up and let me look at you.
Elijah stood up slowly, his unreadable corporate composure finally cracking into a muxtment of pure, overwhelming relief.
They embraced tightly.
Not a performative corporate pat on the back, but a father pulling his son into his arms, a son gripping his father's tailored jacket. Arthur held him for a long moment, his large hands resting heavily on Elijah's shoulders as he scanned his face.
Are you okay, son?
Elijah nodded, his jaw tightening. I'm okay, Dad. Julian Sterling's face had gone entirely, bloodlessly white. The ground beneath his 18-year career had just completely vanished. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. Arthur.
I had absolutely no idea he was your
1430. Arthur Vance slowly turned around, his hands still resting on his son's shoulders. He looked at the folding table, the mop bucket, the flickering light, and the service elevator designed to hide his son from view. Why is my intern sitting next to a freight elevator, Julian? Julian's voice came out broken and high-pitched. There was an unexpected space issue. It was entirely temporary, Arthur.
I was just about to move his setup to the main bay this afternoon.
Clara Higgins stepped out from the shadows, her high heels clicking loudly on the tile floor. Mr. Vance. Her voice was thin, but steady. I think there are some things you need to know about what has been happening on this floor for the past 48 hours and the past 5 years. Arthur looked at her, then gave a single cold nod. I think you're right, Clara. Conference room A, 5 minutes. Everyone.
15.
Conference room A was surrounded by glass walls on 3 sides. Every employee on the 8th floor was standing at their desks, leaning against doors, completely silent, watching inside. Arthur Vance sat at the absolute head of the massive table, his hands folded in front of him. To his left sat Elijah, his navy blazer still carrying the faint brown coffee stain on the collar. To his right sat Julian Sterling, his hands flat on the table, sweat glistening on his forehead. Across from them sat Marcus Sterling from HR, his yellow legal pad open, and Clara Higgins, her eyes red but fierce. Garrett Vance was bouncing his knee frantically under the table. Elijah, Arthur said, his voice calm and measured, tell me about your first 2 days at this firm. Elijah didn't look at Julian. He looked at his father as a professional reporting forensic data. He laid out every single event. The roach comment, the coffee forced into his hand, the storage room, the exclusion from the briefing, the reply-all email sent to 46 people to publicly humiliate his intellect, and the corner by the service elevator.
He didn't raise his voice. He just laid down the facts.
15:30. When Elijah finished, the silence in the room was suffocating. Arthur turned his head toward Clara. Miss Higgins, I'm listening. Clara took a deep breath and bared everything. She talked about the last 5 years. The brilliant young black designers, who had been called diversity hires, the project managers placed on sudden performance plans after filing complaints, and the talented interns who had walked out of the building crying on day 4.
It's a systematic pattern, Mr. Vance.
Clara's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. We all knew it. Every single person on this floor knew it.
We just didn't say anything, because we were terrified of his influence.
Arthur's eyes shifted slowly to Marcus. Marcus, did Elijah file a formal complaint with your office this morning? Marcus looked at the yellow legal pad, where the heavy black line crossing out Elijah's words was visible to everyone. Yes, sir, he did.
And what did you do with that complaint, Marcus?
I downgraded it to informal feedback, sir. I did that because Julian reminded me that he approves my department's budget. I chose my career over my responsibility. I failed you, Elijah. I am deeply sorry. 16, Arthur Vance turned his gaze to Julian Sterling. Julian immediately leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, trying to summon his old, aggressive corporate confidence. Arthur, listen to me. This has been completely blown out of proportion by emotional employees, Julian said, his voice shaking slightly. The kid has a chip on his shoulder.
Was I tough on him?
Yes, but that's how we maintain the premium standards of this firm. We weed out the weak ones who can't handle the corporate pressure. Arthur's voice didn't rise. It dropped into a whisper that felt like a freezing wind. I built this firm on one absolute principle, Julian. Every human being who walks through those doors gets treated with dignity, not because of who their father is, but because they showed up and earned their seat.
You didn't just disrespect my son.
You disrespected every single hard-working person in this building who was too afraid to speak up because of your abuse.
And that ends today.
Arthur stood up, and the room stood with him. Julian Sterling, you are terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your severance is entirely contingent on a signed non-retaliation agreement. If you contact any employee outside of legal channels, that agreement is void, and I will ruin you civilly. 16:30. Julian's mouth fell open, his eyes wide with a sudden, devastating panic as he realized his power was completely gone. Gain couldn't speak. Gain looked around the room, but every single face was turned away from him. He had spent 18 years building an empire of fear, and in less than 10 minutes, he had become completely, utterly white-handed. He picked up his phone and his briefcase with trembling hands, his old arrogance completely shattered as 2 uniformed security officers stepped into the room to flank him. Gain walked out of the glass doors in absolute crushing humiliation. His head finally bowed in front of the entire floor.
17.
The glass doors of the elevator slid shut, and the heavy, corporate silence that followed Julian Sterling's departure slowly began to dissolve. One by one, the senior architects and partners filed out of conference room A, their heads bowed, carrying the sudden crushing weight of their own long-standing complicity. Chloe Bennett stood outside her desk for a moment, her face pale, before walking directly over to Elijah. Her eyes were downcast, rimmed with a faint red edge of shame. "I am so incredibly sorry, Elijah," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the entire floor's gaze. "I saw what he did to you in the lobby on day 1, and I chose to look away because I was terrified of losing my spot. I was a coward." Elijah looked at her for a long, quiet beat, his expression entirely stripped of malice. He gave her a single, reassuring nod. "You are speaking up now, Chloe."
That is the only thing that matters today.
Marcus Sterling from HR walked out next, pausing to offer Elijah a silent, deeply sorrowful nod of apology before carrying his yellow legal pad back down the hall. Clara Higgins was the last to leave the room, sharing a brief, knowing look with Elijah. No words were necessary between them. The rusted iron lock of fear had been broken.
17:30.
Then, it was just the two of them left in the massive glass-walled room, father and son, surrounded by empty leather chairs and the late afternoon light spilling across the polished wood. Arthur Vance sat back down at the head of the table. The unyielding mask of the billionaire CEO, the cold authority that had just dismantled an 18-year career without a single blink, all of it fell away in an instant.
What was left in that room was simply a father looking at his child.
Arthur's eyes scanned the faint dried brown coffee stain still faintly visible on Elijah's plain white collar, the Walmart tie, and the distant open door of the dark ventilation closet down the hall. Arthur's jaw tightened, his voice dropping into a rough, quiet whisper that carried more raw emotion than it had all afternoon. "Why didn't you just make the call, Elijah?"
Why didn't you let me protect you from this?
Elijah looked down at his hands, then directly into his father's glistening eyes. "Because if I called you, Dad, I would have never known the truth. I needed to know, with absolute certainty, that I could stand in a high-pressure room like this, face a man like Julian Sterling, and still hold on to exactly who I am. Without your multi-billion-dollar name, without your executive title, without a single soul in this building knowing whose blood is in my veins. Just me, Dad. I needed to know if
Just me was truly enough to survive in this world."
Arthur stared at his son for a long, unblinking moment, a fierce, overwhelming pride filling his chest. He reached across the table and gripped Elijah's hand in a tight, unyielding hold. "I have always known you were enough, son. Since the day you were born, I have always known."
18.
In the months that followed that fateful afternoon, the fundamental infrastructure of Vanguard Landmark underwent a radical, permanent transformation. Arthur Vance didn't send out hollow corporate-wide emails filled with empty promises or artificial buzzwords about diversity and inclusion. He targeted the system itself. First, he mandated that every single incoming intern, regardless of their university pedigree or background, would receive an identical, high-spec onboarding package, the exact same collaborative workspace, the exact same corporate MacBook Pro, and the exact same network clearance codes, verified by a strict two-person compliance checklist on day 1. Second, he established an entirely independent, anonymous corporate compliance hotline managed by an external law firm completely outside of HR's influence, ensuring no future executive bully could ever wield financial power to bury a human voice again. Third, and this was an act done so quietly that nobody in the firm found out, until years later, Arthur personally called Julian Sterling 3 weeks after his termination on a quiet Sunday evening. "Julian, it's Arthur," the CEO said into the quiet line. After a long, stunned pause, Julian's voice came back, entirely hollowed out, stripped of every ounce of his former arrogance. "What do you want, Arthur? Are you filing charges?" "No, Julian. I am calling to offer you full financial sponsorship for an intensive, 6-month executive behavioral coaching and institutional bias program led by the top professionals in the country."
I will cover the cost myself.
Another heavy silence stretched between them. "Why would you do that for me after what I did?" Julian whispered. "Because I believe in human redemption, Julian. I watched you design incredible landmarks for this capital for 15 years. I know what your mind can achieve when you aren't using your privilege to destroy other people's dignity. But that is your choice to make, not mine. The door is open. Whether you have the humility to walk through it is entirely up to you." Julian didn't say yes, and he didn't say no. His voice cracked completely as he replied, I'll think about it, Arthur." Arthur hung up. Redemption isn't a gift you hand to someone. It's a heavy door, and they have to find the inner strength to turn the handle themselves.
1830.
8 weeks later, Elijah Vance successfully completed his summer internship at program. His final structural and design evaluations were conducted by a blind 3-person panel of external structural engineers, none of whom had any knowledge that his last name matched the silver letters chiseled into the limestone facade of the building. He received a flawless, top-tier rating and was immediately extended a permanent full-time offer as a junior urban architect. He accepted the position, his very first official assignment as a permanent staff member, completely redesigning Vanguard Landmark's national internship, mentorship, and talent and onboarding infrastructure from the absolute ground up. He meticulously detailed every single step of the process, from the greeting protocol at the front desk to the physical workspace assignments to the first-day mentorship walks. He engineered the new system with surgical precision because he understood, better than anyone else in that multi-billion-dollar empire, exactly how it felt when a corporate system fails to protect basic human dignity. On his first official morning as a staff architect, Elijah emerged from the 8th-floor elevator bank. He walked down the familiar carpeted hallway, passing the grand marble lobby, where a man had once forced a hot coffee cup into his hand and told him he didn't belong in America's future. Clara Higgins was standing by the central coffee station, a genuine, warm smile gracing her features. She held out a fresh, steaming ceramic mug toward him.
Welcome back to the line, Architect Vance.
Elijah took the cup, his eyes meeting hers in a brief, powerful moment of shared memory. No words were required between them. Elijah took a slow, deliberate sip, smiled warmly, and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the Washington skyline glowing in the morning sun.
Good coffee,
he said quietly. 19, the story you have just witnessed is a structured narrative. But the harsh, biting realities Elijah Vance experienced the immediate, racist assumptions made about an individual's intellect before they even open their mouth, the cold institutional isolation, the rooms full of highly educated,
well-dressed professionals
who witness blatant injustice every single day and actively choose to look away to protect their own comfort. Those are not fiction. According to official federal employment data, over 60,000 formal workplace discrimination charges are documented every single year within the United States alone. And those numbers only represent the individuals who possessed the immense, terrifying courage to stand up and file a report against the system. For every Elijah who chooses to stay, endure, and fight for his place, there are hundreds of brilliant, exceptional young minds who quietly pack up their bags, walk out of those glass doors in silence, and never return to the industry again. Julian Sterling didn't lose his position, his reputation, and his entire 18-year career because the CEO's son happened to be a black intern.
He lost everything
because he treated a vulnerable human being like garbage, and an entire floor of silent professionals allowed him to do it because they prioritized their safety over their morality. Dignity isn't something anyone can truly take away from you unless you choose to hand it over. 1930. So here is the real philosophical question we must face today. This story isn't actually about Elijah Vance, and it isn't about the Vance Empire. It is entirely about you. The next time you are standing in that corporate corridor, that university hallway, or that neighborhood street, and you see someone in power pour the coffee,
What exactly are you going to do?
are you going to be Julian Sterling, projecting your own deep-seated insecurities onto others? Are you going to be one of those 14 silent professionals who turned their faces away and pretended they didn't see? Or are you going to be the one who finds the courage to take a step forward and speak the truth? If this story threshed out a sense of justice or forced you to re-examine the rooms you sit in every day, please share it with one person who needs to hear this message. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel, because next week we are turning the cameras back on to tell another vital story that the world is actively trying to bury. But before you leave, go back and look very closely at the timeline. There is a tiny critical Easter egg hidden exactly at the minute mark of 5 that completely telegraphs the true nature of Julian Sterling's hidden architectural flaw long before Elijah ever hits send on his audit email. Go back, review the frames, and drop your discovery in the comments section below. Let's see who among you truly has the eyes of an architect. Until next week, stand tall, hold your ground, and remember that you don't have to own the building to completely change the integrity of the room.